What's up everyone? My name is Cody Engel. I'm a staff software engineer, and in this video, I am going to talk about the 5 books you should read in 2021 if you are a software engineer or planning on becoming one. Before we get into it though, I just want to be upfront about this video because I'm not going to be pitching you the same software engineering books. And so yes, Pragmatic Programmer, that is a great book. Refactoring, another great book. Design Patterns, also a great book. Cracking the Coding Interview, really great if you want to get a job in software engineering. And Computer Science Distilled, another really fantastic book. All of those, they're great books. You should read them. I'll drop links to them in the description below if you haven't picked them up yet. Those aren't the books that we are going to be talking about today. Because today, I want to talk about the software engineering books that have been most impactful for me in my life, that I've found to add the most value, the things that have actually turned me into the person that I am today. The first book that I would recommend, I actually don't own a physical copy of it, so it's on my Kindle. It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. It's a book by David Hanson and Jason Fried. They are the founders of Basecamp. They've written a ton of really great books. This is the most recent one that they've written. I would love to do a video talking about all of their other books because I think they are great. Don't have time to talk about those in this video though, so if you want me to do another video, let me know. I'll make another one, but this one is about It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. So the main idea of the book is the modern workplace. It is sick, it's chaotic, it's distracting. You can't really get work done at work. And the premise of the book is trying to figure out, well, how can you actually go about getting work done at work? Because isn't that the point of work? And the people at Basecamp, they've been doing this for a long time. They know what they're doing. And so this book is really about life experiences that they've had on their own. They've seen it work in the real world, and they're just trying to share those experiences with you. So at this point, I just want to talk about some quotes that I picked out from the book. I was going back through looking at my notes. And these are the ones that I thought stood out the most to me, and I just want to talk through those and just give you an idea of why I really recommend reading It Doesn't Have to Be Crazy at Work. So the first quote is, determine the real value of what you're about to do before taking the plunge. This is pretty meaningful to me. I've seen in the past where it's easy to just jump into a project, not really think about, well, what is the actual point of this thing that we're about to do? What value is it going to bring? And so I think that's a really nice and concise way of just thinking about what you're about to build before doing it to make sure that what you're going to build actually will create value. All right, so the next quote is, you set aside 30 minutes or an hour because that's how scheduling software works. You'll never see anyone schedule a 7-minute meeting with Outlook. Which is true, Outlook doesn't even give the option of doing a quick schedule meeting. So Google Calendar, they give you the option where you can cut 5 or 10 minutes off of a meeting, depending on if it's a 30 or 60-minute meeting. Outlook, you can do a 30-minute meeting or you can do a 60-minute meeting. You can of course fine tune it to be 15 minutes or 90 minutes or however long you want it to be. But because of the way scheduling software works, it just defaults to 30 minutes or an hour. Those are the 2 easiest ways that you can schedule a meeting. And so we just have meetings that end up being 30 minutes to an hour, when in reality, maybe it doesn't need to be that long. Maybe you can get the same thing done in 15 minutes. Maybe it only needs 20 minutes. Maybe you don't even need a meeting at all. And I've actually found myself when I'm scheduling meetings now trying to think a little bit more like, okay, do I need 30 minutes actually, or do I only need 30 minutes because that's the default time span for a meeting? All right, and so the next quote that they have is a real quick one. It's momentum fuels motivation. I like this one because it can be really easy working on a project for months on end to just feel like, wow, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I've been working on it, and I'm not seeing any results for it. Whereas on the other hand, if you're working in small chunks, you're delivering it pretty often, say you're delivering software every 2 weeks, you're going to have more momentum built up because you're delivering so often. It's going to build up that motivation to keep doing what you're doing. And so the next quote is, the task was worth it when you thought it would cost 2 hours, not 16. This is a really good one because a lot of times in software, as soon as you start working on something, you just continue working on it until it's done. You don't really go back and reevaluate and wonder, well, should we be doing this still? And I think it's really well summarized in this. When we're in the process of estimating how much time or effort it's going to take to do something, we're able to prioritize, should we do this, based off of how much time it's going to take. So if something's going to take 2 hours, maybe it's a no-brainer, go ahead and do it. But if that same thing was going to take 16 hours, which oftentimes software, it takes longer to do than we estimate. Is it still worth doing? But we don't actually ask that question. We don't go back and think, wow, this is taking longer than I think it was supposed to. Maybe we should just not do this right now. Maybe we should push it off. And then the final quote from this book that I wanted to just bring up is, don't make up real problems you don't have yet. It's not a real problem until it's a real problem. I love this quote because with software engineering, you can just get in the habit of over-engineering things. You can make up problems. You can say, oh, well, I think the user might want to do this. But what I think is really common in the software industry is we tend to make up these problems. We tend to just assume what the user wants, when in reality, what we should be doing is we should build the smallest thing possible, which oftentimes you can release an entirely brand new product in a month, 2 months, maybe 3 months at most. And then from there, you can keep iterating on it every 2 weeks. You collect that user feedback. As soon as you have real users, you can finally collect feedback, you can figure out what is going on. All right, and so the next book that I want to talk about is The Internet is Not the Answer. It is by Andrew Keen. And I first learned about him at the Next Web conference in 2014. He was giving a talk, and then after the talk, I was so enthralled by just what he was talking about that I went up, I met him. He was actually giving out books, so that's how I got the book. And he has some pretty controversial ideas about technology and the internet in general. And based off of the title, you can probably guess that yes, this book is a shining example of just how controversial some of those opinions are. And so the main idea of this book is, in business, you will see people kind of cling to the idea that, if we can do this on the internet, if we can do this with technology, now kind of like with mobile apps or with machine learning, like we always think like this is the answer. But in reality, it's really not. If you go back and look at what the outcomes were for using some of these different technologies, using the internet, we'll actually find out that it caused some pretty bad things to happen. And so that's kind of the premise of this book. So the first quote that I want to talk about from this book is, we took 350 billion snaps in 2011 and an astounding 1.5 trillion in 2013. More than all the photos ever taken before in history. All right, and so the reason why I wanted to bring up this quote is, in the book, he starts talking about Kodak and how this company had thousands and thousands of employees. They were there to make it easier to take photos. You could develop your film. You could share them with friends and family. Out of the blue, this company Instagram comes along with 13, 20 employees, and they completely revolutionize the way that you're going to share your photos online. So much so that Facebook ends up acquiring Instagram, and now Kodak is, it still exists, but it doesn't exist in the same way that it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Another quote from the book is, rather than creating more competition, it has created immensely powerful new monopolists like Google and Amazon. So what this quote is getting at is, the internet, it was supposed to democratize everything. It was supposed to increase competition. But in reality, it just ended up creating a bunch of new monopolies. So if I want to find something, I use Google. If I want to buy something, I use Amazon. If I want to share things with friends and family, I would use Facebook. I don't. If you want to know why I don't use Facebook, that can be an entirely different video. Let me know in the comments down below. Would be happy to make a video entirely dedicated to that. All of these companies that sprung up from the internet that have now become major staples of our lives, was that what the internet was for? Or was the internet actually supposed to increase competition? Are we better off this way with all these new monopolies? I don't know, maybe. The main takeaway of this book for myself, and why I'm recommending that everyone reads it, is it forces you to think about what you're actually doing with software engineering, what you're building, what you're putting out there in the world. Are you building something that is making the world better, or are you building something that is making the world a worse off place? Facebook is a real quick example. They launched to help share things with friends and family, and then they sparked an entire genocide because it was so easy to share misinformation. So you can't really predict those things, but as you're working in your day-to-day life, I think it's a really powerful book to just kind of have in the back of your mind, how can all these great things turn into bad things? All right, so the next book that you should read in 2021 is The Lean Startup. It is by Eric Ries. And so he's an entrepreneur, he's a blogger, and also he is a author. That is actually the way that I learned about Eric Ries. So the main idea of this book is that while most startups fail, they probably didn't have to. There's a good chance that they could have succeeded had they just done the things that he talks about in this book. And while it applies to companies and startups, it also applies to teams in general within a larger company. All right, so the first quote from the book is, "The only way to win is to learn faster than anyone else." I like this quote because if you're operating a startup, you're operating a business, you are in competition with other people. And in order to win, you need to learn things, you need to do things differently than all of the other people that you're competing with. It's a pretty obvious quote, but it also sets the stage for, I think, the rest of the book, because the whole idea is you're learning things, you're applying things, and you want to do that really, really quickly. So the next quote from the book is, "Failure is a prerequisite to learning." The main idea is, in order for you to learn something, you have to fail. In general, failure can be a difficult thing. It can feel bad. The whole point of starting a business or doing anything is you don't want to fail. But you also know from the previous quote that if you want to succeed, you have to learn quicker than everyone else. And so it's kind of saying, in order to be successful, you have to fail faster than everyone else, so then you can learn quicker than everyone else, and then you can actually get on to building the business that's going to succeed quicker than everyone else. So the next quote that I wanted to bring up from the book is, "Success is not delivering a feature, success is learning how to solve the customer's problem." Instead of delivering a feature and then just saying, "All right, we did it, awesome," what you're really doing is you're delivering the feature as the starting point, and from there you want to figure out, what is the customer's true problem? What are we actually trying to solve? And you do that by talking to the customer, by understanding what the customer's problems are, and understanding what your product does well, what your product doesn't do well. And then you go back to the drawing board, you keep what works well, you cut out what doesn't work well, you start adding in some more features that you think might solve the problem. You keep them small enough where you can deliver those features quickly, and you just kind of keep going from there, and you allow the product to kind of compound and get bigger and bigger over time. The last quote that I want to bring up, just to summarize the entire book, is, "When in doubt, simplify." So if you ever have any sort of doubt in terms of what you're building, you're not quite sure what you should be doing, are we solving the right problem? Well, maybe just reassess and think, well, could we simplify this? Because while making a product simpler isn't always going to be the best long-term solution, it will get the feature out there. You'll be able to get that feedback from the customers. You'll know, did this work, did this not work? If it didn't work, you can go back to the drawing board. If it did work, well, you can go back to the drawing board, but now you're gonna solve a different problem. Yeah, I just really like that quote, because a lot of times in software, it's easy to get hung up on really large problems instead of trying to just beat yourself up over it and try to solve this really large, grand problem. Maybe just simplify it, cut back more on what you're building, build out a small thing that can be done pretty quickly, and then go from there. All right, so the next book that I want to talk about is Hooked, and it is, the subline is How to Build Habit-Forming Products. This book is by Nir Eyal. He's an author that I was also introduced to at the Next Web Conference. This book was also given to me at the Next Web Conference, and he even signed it for me, so. Weird flex, I guess. But so he's a best-selling author. He also runs a blog called Near and Far. It focuses on the intersection of psychology, technology, and business. So the question that this book asks and aims to answer is, why do some products capture widespread attention while others fail to take off? And the whole idea is, great products get people hooked. They get people addicted to using them. So this book, it kind of teaches you how do you build products that people are going to be addicted to. The reason why I want you to read this book is, one, it can teach you how to build some really great products. Two, it also teaches you how the products that you're using today, how they're actually affecting your mind and how they are being crafted to be used more often by you. So the first quote that I want to talk about from this book is, "Users who continually find value in a product are more likely to tell their friends about it." So an example, we're on YouTube right now. YouTube uses a lot of methods that are talked about in this book, Hooked. And no one would actually be using YouTube if they weren't getting any value out of it, if they weren't actually enjoying the product itself. If it was just there to get you hooked and constantly watching videos, well, you wouldn't be using it if it wasn't actually good. The next quote is, "Products that require a high degree of behavior change are doomed to fail." This quote was almost ahead of its time, but at this point, it's right on the money, I feel like, where you look at a lot of products out there. They aren't making massive changes over time. They're making small incremental changes. You think about YouTube and the way that it suggests videos to people. They're not making large UI changes over time. They're making little tweaks to their machine learning model that for you and I, we can't even notice what the difference is, but they're running constant experiments to figure out what is the best way for us to better recommend videos, to better surface new videos, and get people to use YouTube more often. They wouldn't be successful with that if they completely rebranded the YouTube app tomorrow and did a completely new overhaul, or they tried to completely change the way that you or I consume videos online. You can go on YouTube today and you can start off by watching one video that you picked, and then 6 hours later, you're watching some other random video that you never thought you were going to watch, but you didn't make any actual choices about it. You just kind of kept making new recommendations and got you to stay within the YouTube application. And the final quote from the book that I want to talk about is that habit-forming products often start as nice-to-haves, like vitamins, but once the habit is formed, they become must-haves, painkillers. And I associate this one more closely with almost like Facebook, where Facebook started off as this really neat way of just staying up to date with your friends, staying up to date with your family, being able to just see the world around you. And it was really neat. It worked out really well. I didn't need Facebook in my life. Like it wasn't a vital part of it. But then over time, it just became this thing that I needed to use more often. And kind of where I think this sort of happened was when Facebook went from being a website where you had to log in, you had to go on your laptop, you had to physically have this big computer on your lap or be sitting at a desk to use, to putting it in cell phones, on mobile apps. So at that point, you could be anywhere with your mobile phone. You could take out your phone, start scrolling through your news feed, seeing what's going on. And at that point, it kind of was able to really hook users. So, they took advantage of the capabilities of smartphones. So being able to send out push notifications. If you got a new friend request, hey, push notification. You had someone like your post, hey, push notification. And throughout this book, he brings up the idea that push notifications are kind of like slot machines in a way, where they release dopamine whenever you get a new one, whenever you get a new notification. They work best when they're not constantly being pushed out. So instead of giving a new push notification for every single new friend request or every single time someone likes your post, Facebook could tweak it a little bit to be like, all right, well, we'll only send you a push notification if you got a friend request from someone that we think you know, or you'll only get a push notification if 7 people liked this post in the last 30 minutes or something like that. And so it creates this variability where instead of you're always getting a notification, you're only getting a notification some of the time. It makes you want to use the product more because of that variability that you have with it. So book number 5 is The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It is by Ben Horowitz. He is a co-founder of Andreessen Horowitz. It's a venture capital firm. And prior to that, and kind of the subject matter for this book is he started off working in technology. He was a software engineer. And then he became a co-founder for a company, which didn't work out. They pivoted, and he learned the hard things about hard things. And through that pivot, he was able to reestablish a company that was massively successful. And I guess we're kind of starting to get into the subject matter of the book. So let's actually just get into that part right now. So the main idea of this book is he talks about the less glamorous parts of having a startup. Ben learned these lessons the hard way when he had a company called LoudCloud, which wasn't taking off, and he had to pivot to a company that he would rename to Opsware, which was really completely different from what the original company was. He laid off a bunch of people. I think at one point he went down to only having 10 employees, so he laid off a huge portion of his company at LoudCloud. But ultimately, he was able to save the business and sell it to HP for $1.65 billion. All right, so let's get into some of the quotes from the book. So the first one is, "The hard thing isn't setting a big, hairy, audacious goal. The hard thing is laying people off when you miss the big goal. The hard thing isn't hiring great people. The hard thing is when those great people develop a sense of entitlement and start demanding unreasonable things. The hard thing isn't setting up an organizational chart. The hard thing is getting people to communicate within the organization you just designed." So this is a pretty big quote, a pretty just big generalization of the book. And the reason why I wanted to start off with that quote is oftentimes we'll talk about like the hard thing is, setting this goal. The hard thing is like coming up with the next big idea, coming up with the next Instagram. That's actually not the hard thing. The hard thing is actually doing that thing. The hard thing is not hiring 100 engineers over the course of a year. The hard thing is actually keeping those engineers around, or having to fire those engineers when the business plan didn't work out. So that kind of sets the stage for the book in general, but then Ben goes into some different ideas and things like that. And so one of those quotes was, build a culture that rewards, not punishes people for getting problems into the open where they can be solved. I like this quote because it kind of changes some of the norms. I think working as a software engineer, there is that understanding that you make mistakes and mistakes happen, but people are still afraid of making mistakes. Like, they will still want to hide those mistakes. And instead of hiding those things, just create a culture where you're rewarding people for bringing them up. Because a lot of times, in especially larger companies, you'll have projects that aren't going well, but no one wants to admit it, no one wants to talk about it, because we're not going to get rewarded for this project failing. And so instead of actually figuring out and bringing it up early on that this project is failing, how can we get it back on track? It just kind of gets swept under the rug, and the project continues to fail, and at some point you can't hide it anymore, and it just blows up. So the next quote is, that's the hard thing about hard things. There is no formula for dealing with them. I like this quote. It pretty much summarizes the book. There isn't really a way that you can prepare someone for the things that Ben had to do. So because there isn't really a way to prepare someone for that, really all you can do is just share some of those life experiences, and maybe it will help them formulate their own thoughts and figure out their own ways of how maybe they could overcome some of these things. But at the end of the day, you can't just say, like, to do this thing, to like lay off all of your company, just do this and it'll be okay. Like, no, that's not how it works. There really isn't a good way about doing any of these things. They're difficult things to do. And so the hard thing about this video was keeping it to just 5 books. So I really enjoy reading this style of book. There's more books that I would have loved to have talked about in this video, but I wanted to keep it to 5. I wanted to try to keep this video to a reasonable length. If you want me to make another video like this, you want me to make a part 2, help me get this video to 500 likes. If we can, I will go ahead and make a part 2 to this video. Also, let me know which of these books you're planning on reading first, or if you have some book recommendations for others in the comment section, be sure to let them know down below. And thank you so much for watching. If you want to know when I publish part 2, whenever that comes out for this, be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell, and be sure to smash the like button until it turns blue. Once the like button turns blue, you will know that the video has been liked and that we're getting a little bit closer to making a part 2 to this video. So thank you again for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.